Welcome to the Parts Party. I'm Adriana,
And I'm Ella.
and this is your invitation to hang out with us and our beautiful guests as we explore the lived experience of internal family systems. We want to share in our common humanity as humans who have multiple parts within us, so we can show you what it really is to honour this model of therapy in our own lives. This is a place for IFS nerds, therapists, enthusiasts, or just anyone who wants to get to know their parts and their self a little better.
So grab a soft drink for your little ones, a tea for your manager parts, and maybe something fancy for your firefighter parts. Because all parts are welcome. Max Littman is a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, consultant, and writer specializing in internal family systems therapy with a focus on attachment, trauma, and gay and queer men. His work centers on helping people connect with their authentic selves, heal long held wounds, and discover harmony between mind, body, and spirit. As a gay man, Max is passionate about creating safe, shame free spaces for LGBTQ clients. Beyond his clinical work, he mentors therapists, writes on intersections of identity and healing, and supports IFS trainings. Max lives in the Bay Area in the States with his husband and their terrier, Lucy. Welcome to the Parts Party, Max.
Thanks, Ella, and thank you, Adriana, for both having me. Already noticing parts that are just like wanting to fade into the background. Absolutely have a tension inside of parts that want not so much recognition, but relevancy, and then parts that are, okay, I'll be over here in the corner.
Yeah, common polarity, I think. See me, see me. Don't look.
Yep,
Mm,
yep.
yeah. Anything else you'd like to share that we didn't touch on from the bio?
Yeah, one of the major things since I wrote and published is I'm a new father of a adopted infant, which happened, I think, 2 months after the book published. So I know in the back that it said living with his husband and an Airedale Terrier. We can add daughter to that as well. That feels pretty significant.
Wow, congratulations. That's so special. How old is she now,
Thank you.
Matt?
She just turned 5 months, 10 days
Oh,
ago, looking at
oh,
the calendar here. Yeah,
That's
she's
precious. Yeah.
She's very precious. We've been extremely fortunate and blessed to have a healthy daughter who's, I would say, easy by baby standards, from what I understand. She's pretty easily soothable, pretty happy, very engaged, very talky.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I have a 8-month-old niece, and so I can relate to the joy of a little one in your life and seeing their personality start to shine through. What an exciting time for you.
Yeah, thank you. And they definitely let you know when they don't approve of you taking something away that's not safe for them, like Lysol wipes.
Would you like to share a little bit about how you actually came to IFS and how you started to experience yourself as a system of parts rather than a fixed personality?
IFS was in my awareness and the periphery. I don't know if it was even before I went to social work school. It may have been early on. I'm not quite sure because my cousin, who's complicated, he's more like uncle age, but he's my dad's first cousin, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
age wise, he's more of a kind of uncle age. He's been a MFT for probably 30 years here in the Bay Area. In the early 2000s, he trained directly with Dick for his level one, and he actually went on to PA for Susan McConnell. And now Susan knows me better than him, which is wild. So it's sort of been on the periphery for me. And then my dad, who's a therapist as well, I hadn't shifted yet into private practice. I was working at a crisis clinic, and he was persistent about saying, "Hey, there's this upcoming training for IFS, and you want me to support you in taking that training." And my dad's not an IFS therapist. He's retired now, mostly retired, but he was Gestalt primarily when he was an active therapist. Anyway, so I kind of pushed it to the side because in crisis settings, it can be useful, but I just didn't see it as being a good investment at the time, considering the population I was working with. Then eventually moved into a really large private for profit private practice. And it's still sort of on the periphery. And I was using kind of more short term methods, specifically ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. At some point, maybe 6 months in or so, my dad finally broke me and he was like, "Oh, here is this one training that's specifically for gay men." And it's like, "Oh, well, that's interesting. Okay." And I'm working in long-term therapy now with people, so this makes more sense. I think prior to that training, I'd taken a Pezzi like 2-day workshop that was recorded of Frank Anderson, and then just was really doing IFS from a really managerial perspective of like, okay, got to
Mm.
identify all of the protectors first, go through the 6 Fs. Then once you're done with all the protectors, then you can go to the exile, that kind of way of doing it. And the more that I was applying it with clients I was working with, the more I was recognizing how much of a difference it made with the clients that I was working with, usually no matter what the presenting issue was. And even when I was doing it the managerial way or the rules constrained way, I took a gay and queer men specific training with Derek Scott and his Stepping Stones program at IFSCA, which was fantastic. I actually I prefer it to the level one training. I did actually take the first LGBTQ plus affinity level one training. That aside, that's sort of how I came into learning about IFS on my own and then slowly going into alternative learning platforms to the IFS Institute. Eventually became level one trained. But at that point, I've been practicing a lot and going to a lot of different trainings and workshops and what have you. I'd been to Susan McConnell's step one training of not really training, but experiential of somatic IFS. And I did that before I did level one training. And actually, I met who my level one trainer was in the somatic IFS retreat. So that was interesting and nice to see a friendly face as a trainer in my level one training.
Hmm. And what about the piece when you started to get that this was actually about you as well? What was it like when you started to recognize your own parts and start to see yourself as a system?
I don't know what point it was, but I started working with my own therapist very early in my learning stages. Yeah, I think the more that I learned experientially, it was like, oh, like I guess one example of this is in the past, like I thought I was crazy when I had this experience of when I was younger, when I was early teen, preteen, I would have this like fantasy of like, oh, I'm this character and it's in a sitcom or a drama and these are my challenges and people who would be watching this would be drawn to me as a person or drawn to me as a character or have empathy for me. There was a moment that it clicked and I'm like, oh, that was a part. When I connected with it, it was helping with feeling like on the outside or feeling overwhelmed or not feeling well understood or not feeling special or something like that. But I'm not sure if that was the first moment, but it feels like a very notable moment for me where I'm like, oh, that's what this is. And then there were plenty of other moments where it was like, oh, that's what was happening there, or that's what was going on inside me.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
More recognition I'm hearing than something you kind of discovered as new words to what you'd already experienced. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that example. I'm noticing the resonance in my own system because as a teenager, I definitely had that TV watcher part that would then project my own fantasy of being seen via a character or that experience. Yeah, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
wonder how universal it is. I'm sure we're not the only people out there that have parts that were doing that for us. And yeah, it's interesting. Speaking to it prompted my own reflection of now that I have got so much context, I'm going, oh, yeah, I felt so unseen back then. And that was a way my parts kind of could get a need met, which was to feel like I could get seen, even if it was only via proxy of my imagination. And yeah, it's interesting noticing how that started to shift. Like that part didn't necessarily need to do it as much as I started to find other ways to actually feel seen in my external life.
yeah,
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for bringing that in.
yeah. You're welcome.
I'm curious as well, you were speaking about how growing up with a dad that was a therapist and a cousin uncle who was in that space as well. And there may have not have been this explicit exploration of parts growing up. I'm curious what your sense of awareness of your system was back then. It may be, I don't know if there was any awareness or if there was this shift of once you had language. Yeah, I'm curious what that experience was like, kind of having therapy be something that was around you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's a good question. The, the immediate answer that came to me is no. I didn't have my own therapy until I was 21 or 22. So even though I was around it, if it was omnipresent, I was ignoring it. The one thing that I'll say though is even though this is not getting at the systemic thing or we're made out of parts thing, there was a sense of, I can't remember if this was before I came out or after I came out. I think it was before, where it's like, oh, the shame that I feel about being attracted to other men and this hiding of it, like this is universal. This can be applied to anything. Like this could be applied to anything anybody is feeling ashamed about. Being in the kind of not isolated in the sense of like not having any relationships or friendships with anybody, but isolated in the sense of not having access to more information about shame or mental health, or access maybe isn't the right word, but the attention or being there or readily accessible information, that it was like, oh, why aren't people talking about this as a global universal thing, not just a gay or sexual orientation thing, in terms of a core tenet of internal family systems that definitely was kind of like an early, oh, this is a thing.
Mm.
It was interesting that you said that, Max, because before you came on the call, Adriana and I were just talking about how wonderful the book is and how, of course, it's for specifically gay and queer men, but how universal so much in there is and how relevant for everyone the information is. So,
Yeah. I get asked a question a lot. What's different with, I think specifically the attunement chapter of like, what's different about doing this sort of attunement practice with gay and queer men than with heterosexual or cisgender or what have you people. I'm like, it's really nothing. There is no difference
Mm.
because, the core of it is, to me, usually is shame and a feeling of aloneness or powerlessness. And it has a different face to it, even though the organs underneath are the same.
Mm.
yeah.
Ella and I were definitely speaking to how amazing your book is and how universal it feels. I really appreciate how it both felt educational for me in that I was able to learn more about a community that I, of course, as a cisgendered female, I don't have that lived experience. And I'm able to really appreciate that in a more deep way.
Mm,
And at the same time, so much of what you're writing about is so universal.
yeah.
And you really wove that all throughout the book. And yeah, I think what you're speaking to, that experience of that shame I felt, and it was tied to your lived experience, your kind of autobiographical story of Max, in that I was a gay man and I felt a lot of shame about that when I was closeted. And there was some tuning in I'm hearing that you had to, yes, that's what's going on. And it's a universal experience that kind of also transcends that story, which is this experience of shame, of othering, of powerlessness, of feeling a difference to other people.
Mm,
Sounds fascinating that you were kind of able to have that experience of this is both to do with me and beyond me, because sometimes we can get so stuck in our story of our experience.
mhm. Yeah, it's totally true. When Brene Brown sort of blew up, I'm like,
Mm.
that's
Mm.
what I was thinking about.
Mm.
And do you have a part that you could share with us? We'd love to hear about, a specific trailhead or a tormentor that people have experienced to kind of give an example for how it looks inside for you as
Mm,
you start to notice parts and work with them and help them.
it's a really good question. This is taking up a lot of space for me internally, and transparently, I'm really only able to have like a small wedge, if you can even call it that, of space when I'm with my therapist. is just a really, really cynical part. I'm not even sure that's the right way of putting it. It's not even cynical. It's not hopelessness. It's sort of like somewhere between cynicism and apathy.
Mm.
My intellectual understanding of it, which is sort of as much as I can get on my own at this point. A time in life, a time in the world, a time sort of regionally in being a new parent and turning 40 in a couple months. It's just a huge life shift. Understandably, parts are having a hard time with that. A, with change, and B, with like, okay, so what did we have in mind when we were going to be this age or in general, or what are the trade-offs that have come that they weren't expecting in terms of being partnered, in terms of having a kid, living the life and having the choices that we made in terms of where to live and to have a home that we purchased and to both work from home and all these different things, to be a therapist. So it's all kind of coalescing at the same time, in addition to everything that's happening globally in terms of politics, governments, polarizations, wars, climate change, climate disasters. I say this too as living in the hill area of Oakland, California, where there have been wildfires in the past. There was the huge fire in Los Angeles about a year ago.
Mm.
My parts were super scared as that was happening, being like, oh, that can easily happen here.
Yeah.
So that's not so much present now, but it's the accumulation of all these things that has got a protective part of me being like, let's just not care about anything and not have any expectations of anyone or anything. It's all going to let you down ultimately. That one has had a extremely hard time relaxing. That feels like I'm saying that more from parts that just really want it to relax.
Mm.
In one sense, it makes total sense to me. And in others, there are parts of me like, hey, could you stop doing that? We have a daughter to help raise. Like, don't don't put that shit on her.
Mm.
Parts that are very, maybe it's the same one that have pessimism about what options she's going to have when she grows up. What sort of society and world will she live in? Like, how difficult might it be for her? So, and this is not even to mention AI and where that might be going in terms of not just jobs and what that means for people's financial situations and resource situations, but even more so like what information is real and what isn't, and the ability
Mm.
to discern that feels like it's going to get harder and harder. It already is getting harder and harder. So I'm not so sure. A part of me is saying like that's not a great example of the work because we haven't been able to work with that one that well. But
It's kind
um,
of great because you're bringing in a real life thing that hasn't been neatly worked through. Sometimes we love to present a neatly tied bow, this package of something that looks really nice once we talk about it in hindsight, whereas
yeah,
life is really messy and the reality of working with parts is a lot messier than I think we often would like. And I'm hearing this part's really responding to the very real constraints of the society we're currently living in.
yeah,
I have what I would call a politically checked out part that other parts have a guilt about because they go, no, but there are so many, I see so many other beautiful therapists and people that have wonderful things to say and display their activism. And my parts go, yeah, you can't go there.
oh yeah,
And I do think about the trade off. The trade off is I think I would be in constant states of anxiety.
yeah.
I like the use of cynical apathy. I'm thinking about an ex of mine. I'm like, yeah, he had a lot of cynical apathy about society.
It's
Yeah.
interesting because for me it doesn't go front facing because there's some
Mm.
set of parts that are like, ooh, people don't
Mm.
like to be around that. We're going to keep that inside.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Like you said, you've got those managers that are going, I'm
Yeah,
here to raise a child and instill hope in her and
yeah,
not pass that on to her. And I've got a practice to run and I can't be there bringing the cynicism to my clients that
yeah,
I'm supporting. And it's just kind of there in the background was what I'm hearing. Mm.
yeah. And something that feels important to name here too is, and this is maybe coming from what I refer to as my hyperliberal critic part, who's super social justice oriented and what have you, but this is also true and important, is I am in a incredibly privileged position. And I don't just mean that from a cis white male perspective, but I mean that from a resources perspective of like we're likely to be really okay, not so much no matter what happens, but we're very well buffered, my family, from being targeted in any way. That's something that feels important to acknowledge because a lot of people don't have that, not just that privilege, but don't have that, aren't afforded that. And it's much understandably scarier and there's much more at stake than what me and my family have.
Yeah.
A part of me just wanted to name that. And then, of course, I have parts that feel guilty about that as well.
Mm,
So then that's a trailhead in and of itself.
mm,
Yeah. But you're certainly not just sitting there and keeping all that to yourself, Max. The writing that you do is really speaking a lot of truth to power or speaking about things that perhaps other people don't speak about but should. Some of the blogs we were mentioning before we chatted was the one about exiling of cis men in therapeutic spaces. And
mm.
that particularly has been relevant to different environments that we've been in. I'm curious, did you get external backlash from that and then in turn much internal backlash?
I was shocked. I did not receive the amount of external backlash that I
Mm.
expected. And even a part of me right now is like, oh no, are we going to talk about that? Like we were able to just drop that, get comments on it, and then be out. My parts were surprised at how I posted fairly soon after that an article on therapist dissociation that felt far more controversial than the one on race. And I'm
Right?
like,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on here? So yeah, I did not get as much external blowback for that as I would have expected, but there were some comments that were made about just it not being a legitimate framing, not from a sense of like you're being racist about this or you're being insensitive or you're wrong about this or what have you. It was more like, oh, we don't need to put labels on things or this is a political framing that's unnecessary or so I was sort of surprised at that
Hmm.
and also surprised at some other comments that were taking it in the ways where it was like, yeah, men are emasculated and all these things. I'm like, I what?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see where people took it, but it wasn't as backlashy nearly as much as I would have
Hmm.
expected.
Hmm.
Sounds like there was more of a parts party before you press publish than there was really after.
Oh yeah.
Because there was some tentative sort of paragraphs in there about, like, how's
Hmm.
this gonna
Oh
land?
yeah.
That it was written very respectfully. You could kinda hear
Hmm.
your parts that were
Yeah.
a little conscious about how it was going to be
Hmm.
received. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think an earlier draft of it was much more laden with that language and those parts. The more that I shared it with a variety of people, they're like, actually, you don't have to apologize as much as you're apologizing here.
Hmm.
And actually the piece doesn't is hurt by that. The overall
Hmm.
piece. Sort of speaking toward that, I'd been working on it for almost a year and I had said to myself, or parts of me had said, do not publish this before your book is out because if you publish this first, people will be like, "Oh yeah, that's the racist guy." that that was
Oh,
that's the racist guy
yeah.
who was defending white fragility. We're not going to buy his book, which ironically there's a whole chapter on white supremacy culture in the book. It's funny because I guess I had moved on from that. And yeah, I have parts that look very closely at my analytics. And that one has had a recent spike. So it's like it has a long tail, apparently. So
Hmm.
I don't know when people share it with somebody else and then they share it with somebody else. And that's been interesting to
Hmm.
pay attention to is what pieces seem to pop back up in terms of popularity or interest or retention.
Mm.
Hmm. It has a lot of relevancy, and I really appreciate a lot of your articles speak to things that we often don't speak about or that could potentially be a little bit controversial or just there's so much nuance to it. And you are brave and have the courage to speak to it, including, yeah, the therapeutic dissociation. Yeah, that can feel a bit controversial too. But that piece about white men in healing spaces, it's very relevant because it is an experience. There are often many therapists that are holding the experience of domestic or sexual abuse, or women who are victims of male privilege and white male privilege specifically. And that can really color the experience of a white cis man coming into that space.
Yeah.
And the really fine line of, I don't want to coddle any man
Yeah.
in terms of if they need to face accountability for their privilege. And at the same time, that's another experience of shaming that can actually heighten the protectors that take on privileged stances and all that kind of stuff as well. And where is the nuance for navigating inclusion when inclusion in healing spaces can feel threatening for people's systems, for people that feel victimized or feel anger towards men, and a man coming in that could potentially actually be a source of healing, but instead there's kind of this pushback. Yeah, it's just such a layered, difficult, nuanced topic, and I'm glad you spoke to it.
It is, and the more that I wrote it and shared it with people, and it became more of a living thing than just like I'm editing this and I'm done with it. The more that I recognize, I mean, I had parts, I think I named it in the article, I had parts that like wanted this to be like, that were just totally self-righteous about it. Like, this is happening and nobody's saying anything. And as that part was able to relax as I was editing and rewriting, and as you're speaking about this too, it's reminding me that I don't know if this is a hope, but it's sort of an imagining of like, oh, maybe the best thing here and the most accessible thing here is if somebody were to read this, then there just might be a split second of pause before unloading on
Mm,
a white cis man in a training, or
mm,
being like, oh, or writing him off internally or something like that.
mm. Yeah.
And maybe it still does happen, or if there can just be a little inch, I just wonder what would happen. And what you said is totally right. And I heard this from multiple other people, including my editor of my book, Michelle Glass, who are both like, yeah, we know the experiences ourselves and from participants in trainings and workshops and stuff. It's just too much what happened in the past to be able to give that opportunity or grace to a white cis male peer or a fellow participant. That was humbling to hear from them.
Mm. Yeah. I really appreciate what you said in that it's just that hope of even just a moment of pause in unloading it onto someone. I think it's those moments because we can be so reactive and our parts can react before we're even aware of them doing that. And it can form the way that we view someone, the way we perceive the safety of a situation, and inviting just a split second of pause and go, oh, yeah, there is this extra perspective. And then you can maybe just take a little bit more. It's just inviting that second of self in.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it may be like this is I'm not sure if now I want to rewrite the article again because I may have said this. I've written so much I don't even remember what I've written sometimes. But sometimes it's totally legitimate of like, you know, a white cis man may be totally blended with whatever legacy burden stuff and can't be responsible or accountable in that space, right? Of course, it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to be self-led, period, but to be self-led, quote unquote, or for parts not to take over when that's happening in those sort of spaces, it's not to be expected to, be thinking about what I'm presenting in this article, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
It's like, got to keep myself safe, got to hold the boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Max, I'd love to hear more about what you mean by being self-led. And there was one of the articles that I only read the headline of where you said it's easier to be self-led outside of the therapy room. So I was curious, is
Was
that
it
what?
inside?
Inside.
Inside, yeah, because I would agree with that.
I'm like,
So much
outside.
easier to be self-led when I'm sitting in the chair.
I'm like, who?
Oh no,
Who
okay,
is that?
that's so true. That's so true. Sitting as a therapist is easy, but tell us more about being self-led for you. What does that feel like? What does that mean?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I'm noticing parts of me saying, like, well, you haven't felt self-led in quite a while, so who are you to answer that question? Let me see how I want to answer that, though. I have a complicated relationship with the term self-led, I guess, because it can minimize the importance of our parts and it can have the unintended elevating of self as being better than parts.
Mm,
Pam Krause, the thing that she really harps on or really focuses on is that self is not better than parts. Parts have literally saved our lives, literally saved our lives. Nothing would get done without parts, and self is not complete without parts. Like it can't do all the things that parts do on its
Yeah.
behalf. And another thing that she said is parts are our humanity and self is our soul. So if we're
cool.
just completely self, we kind of lose a little bit of our humanity. And that's oftentimes what I find is more helpful with clients is when our parts are resonating with theirs. It's sometimes more helpful than if we're operating from self or just in a state of patience of self or what have you, or, the more traditional 8 Cs or so that's one caveat I want to offer
Mm.
with the self-led piece. But I will say when I feel a lot of self, maybe this is self-led, maybe it's not, but when I feel a lot of self in session with clients, there's just this feeling of delight or lightness, delight in being there with them, kind of fuzzy feeling around my body or kind of in my limb areas, and just the sense of, I don't know, just totally happy to be with them and resting in that. I'm sure there could be words to put that into being self-led, but that's what comes to mind when you say self-led. Self-led feels a little bit more action oriented than what I experience self-leadership to be, or when self is being trusted. And then the other thing which came up with a client recently is when it's not safe in the external world for self to be expressed or seen. I don't know if this was a just really smart, creative part or if it was channeling something else, but sometimes it's way safer for self to assist, not to lead. I'm thinking in
Mm.
just really, really unsafe situations where life is really at stake. For this particular client, there was a sexual abuse history and a stalking history and just a whole bunch of just awful, awful things. So understandably, parts were just like, yeah, I'm not going to trust you. Like self is not a safe thing. And it's like, yeah, actually, that was true for many systems who've experienced a really high level of abuse and lack of safety. Like it's, more reasonable to be self-assisted than self-led. So I think of that a little bit here too.
Thank you for your nuance around languaging and how it can be interpreted by systems and by parts and hearing, yes, self-led gives this insinuation of that self is elevated or that it's leading parts as opposed to self and parts and all of it's technically self. And the words that I'm struck with right now as you're speaking was aloneness. I really loved the examples you used in your book about the shift that can happen when you start treating parts as real living beings inside you rather than just a function of the mind. In one of your case examples, you asked the question about their inner critic part and kind of offered them that shift of viewing it as a living being. And then you asked the question of, and I wonder if he even knows that he's not alone in there.
Mm.
And you said the part was like, "Oh, no, I thought I was the only thing keeping the client's life together." And as you're speaking about that distinction between self-led versus the experience of self and part, it's almost like that shift from the part thinking it's alone and that self is this elevated state that it needs to have this pressure to get to versus the part realizing it's not alone and it can be appreciated in doing what it's doing. And even that warm and fuzzy experience you described of that delight in being with my client or being with their parts. It's like self is this delight in just being with whatever is there so that the thing that's there doesn't have to necessarily feel alone. That's kind of what I'm sitting with as you're speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And coming back to the question, Ella, you had of why is it that we feel more self-led in session with clients than outside? I've heard this from multiple different like trainers. I think Pam Krause said this as well, and maybe C. Sykes said it as well. I haven't had the benefit of experience her directly, but if you want a therapist's nervous system to settle, just put a client in front of them. You've heard
Yeah.
this before?
Yeah.
Yeah. For me personally, I'm in the practice of noticing my own parts in session, just there naturally being a lot of appreciation for them and a lot of appreciation for what information they can give me about what's happening in session, what might be happening for the client. On some occasion, it being like appreciation of like, oh, what this client is bringing is helping me being able to more starkly see my own parts. And I'm only thinking about this out loud now, is it can be really less threatening for my own parts where it's like, okay, so you notice this thing that's vulnerable, but we're not working on us now. Great. Okay. So we notice it, but we don't have to do anything with it. there's that piece of it. I have parts that are so knowledgeable and adept at the model when I'm with a client and things are quote going well, or they're like excited about like, oh, that sounds like a legacy burden, or oh, is that really a protector, or is that an exiled protector, or like, and they get excited about it. It's not this, it doesn't feel like this whole, oh, got to figure it out kind of thing. Like, oh, I wonder if that's this or that's that. There's a get to play kind of quality for it. And some of that feels self-energetic and some of that feels parts and parts having their own self-energetic interaction with it. But also I think about from a neurobiological or polyvagal perspective being the co-regulation, where it's like, oh, as I watch or experience a client feeling regulated or trusting me with something, there's that, oh, something I'm doing here is helping them to relax. I mean, I think about my daughter too. I don't know if both of you have had this experience, but when you get a baby to laugh, it feels really good. Or when you have a baby feeling soothed, going from being distressed or expressing a need or something like that, and holding them and then they calm. There's just something incredibly calming about that. The experience for me is when I'm with my with my own thoughts and with my own parts or with my own experiences, it's just like gets on this loop of like, how do we fix this problem? How do we fix this problem? How do we fix this problem?
Something clicked for my system as I was listening to you talk, that when I'm with my clients, I'm just very conscious that I'm a system of parts and I'm here with another person, and how can I really, be in as much self energy as possible. And when I'm going about my daily life, I'm often just kind of in the moment. And when I'm going about my daily life, when I remember the multiplicity and kind of feel the parts, I'm immediately a little unblended and a bit more self-led. So something about just the mindfulness of what it is to be in session brings about a little bit more of it. Yeah.
Hmm.
We talked about self-led, but we didn't ask you the really tricky question of like, what is self?
I can't answer that question. I don't think anybody can. I think people can approximate it, but words just fail us when it comes to that. I think there's a lot of things that can be defined pretty well. I think self is more of an experience than anything else in the model. Like you can say protector, like you can define that pretty well, or firefighter or exile. It's just like, oh, it's really vulnerable feelings, or it's a sense of protectiveness, or a sense of urgency, or, those kinds of things. And sure, the 8Cs are decent approximations of it. I mean, you can say one with the universe, or at peace with yourself, or really you could say a lot of things, but I think it's so much harder to get words to that experience than a lot of other things. As I was looking at that question before we started, I think it was today I just posted a new a new article that kind of gets at that. Have either of you heard of a movie called Limitless?
I love them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There you go. Like if anybody is interested in having a visual or film representation of what it can be like, I think that's a really good one. It's Bradley Cooper in a 2011 film where he's this washed up writer that can't pay rent and all this and used to be a drug addict, and then he gets presented this pill that will help him access 100% of his brain rather than 20% of his brain. And then he doesn't just become super smart, he just becomes really perceptive, and all the things around him and the people, like he's just noticing these really subtle things that unless you're really slowed down and tuned in, you would totally miss. And it seems to be like some combination what one would experience on ketamine and Ritalin and, a whole bunch of different combination of and a well, not really a hallucinogen, but anyway, I've had some similar states just after unburdenings or when there's some collective self energy enough around to be tuned in like that, sometimes on certain substances. I won't say what or when or what that deal is, but I've had sort of some of those non ordinary states. I think that film really is a good representation of what it can feel like, even though for him it's much more parts led in terms of how he uses that
Mm.
capacity, but the actual capacity that he has, I think, is a helpful representation of what it can feel like.
I have a story. It's so funny you mentioned Limitless because earlier this year, my system showed me a secret it was carrying, and it was a quite a significant trauma that I had no conscious memory of. But I had this unburdening experience from that, of course. And for the next week, I don't know if I've ever experienced self energy like I've experienced that before. I was going to bed with this smile on my face, and like it felt like light was just glowing out of me, like for meters around me, like just for about 7 days straight. And my boyfriend at the time was like, "You are like the guy from Limitless." He literally said those words. He's like, "You're just walking around like the guy from Limitless." I was like,
Wow.
like the next day after the unburdening, I saw like a whole cohort of clients and had the most profound sessions where they were all having these spontaneous unburdenings and all of that happening. Yeah, it was fascinating. Yeah, that's definitely what it felt like. I was just tuned into this other dimension,
Mm.
and then got this whole backlash from my system when it went away. I went, oh, where did self go? There's this kind of story our
Yeah.
parts can have about coveting that experience and wanting to stay in that forever. And what if I've lost it? If I'm not in that constant glowing state,
Yep.
what does that mean? And yeah,
Mm.
it's such a fascinating experience when you have those glimpses and those
I
moments.
can totally relate to
Yeah.
that. And the sessions are so good after like a really good unburdening. I haven't had one for years, I want to say. There's been good work in relationship with parts, but not unburdenings. And that reminds me of one unburdening that went that way a little bit. It was the one time I had COVID, and it was like way after the vaccines and stuff, but I felt terrible. It was just awful. I guess because my system was so more vulnerable at the time, and just there was things down. There was some part that I helped to unburden it that had a fear of dying, which was very random to be in like a just like almost hallucinogenic state, like with how bad the COVID was. And there was just like that seeing in 4D and having that other dimensional access quality. And I remember in the days after, a friend who's also an IFS therapist was just like, there's something different about you.
Mm.
What's going on?
Mm.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Wild where we can go.
Yeah.
In your book, you said unburdening is often seen as a profound milestone, but it's not the ultimate goal or endpoint. As you said in the book, really the work doesn't start and end with unburdenings. That's just a piece that can be a really profound healing piece, but it's about the ongoing relationship, and you can be there for however the parts show up. And as you said, all throughout this recording with you, you've been touching on sometimes we have real external constraints. Sometimes parts are necessary to do what they do. How much freer is it if they can feel appreciated by us when the manager steps in or when the firefighter steps in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me there's another IFS clinician that I was texting about the cynicism and apathy thing, and she works with a much less well-resourced and more marginalized community than I do. And she was saying how in a recent session, it was basically working with a client's protector to get to the airport to be safe from ICE. I'm pretty sure it was a Latino client. It's not going to be safe to be in self or self-led when there's that
Or
kind
go
of
to the exile. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Thank you for speaking to that.
Yeah. Well, it's been a delight to chat with you, Matt. I'm mindful to let you go to have your dinner with your little one and your husband.
Oh,
Yeah.
she's eating too. I just realized, yeah, she's just started eating solids, so she
Oh,
will be
Oh,
eating
so
with us.
exciting.
Yeah.
And you've got a dog. I think there's nothing better than the relationship between a baby and a dog when the baby's just started eating because the dog suddenly just will be
Yep.
right next to her going, "Are you gonna drop something? Are you gonna drop something?"
Yeah, she's very food motivated, our dog. So
Did you have a quote or something that you wanted to end?
I'll do a Pam Krause quote because she's a quote machine. And I've taken two courses from Pam at this point. One was a weekend on self-like parts, and then another was a 2 weekend thing on direct access. But this was at the self-like parts thing. And I think this fits with what we've been talking about. Sometimes IFS therapy from our self-like parts is better than any other therapy that can be offered.
Hmm.
And actually, I'm going to rephrase that. Oftentimes, IFS therapy from our self-like parts is better than any other therapy that can be offered.
Hmm.
Mm.
Thank you both for having me. Really enjoyed myself.
Thank you for being part of the Parts Party with Adriana and Ella. We hope you enjoyed being with us, and we wish you many moments of self-leadership. We'd love your support by liking, subscribing, sharing this podcast, and we hope to see you next time.